Hi everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name's Amie. If you're back here from being like a subscriber, I just want to thank you. Or if you've previously seen any of my other videos, thank you so much for commenting and liking and subscribing and viewing. I really appreciate it. Um, I apologize for because I know I posted my first video and then I went like away for a month and then I've just posted my second one. I feel like I'm struggling a bit to incorporate booktube into my real life. It's just been a lot. It's been really hectic, not trying like finding the motivation to film, even though I am technically reading and even if I want to do it, sometimes I find that I'm really, really exhausted at the end of the week. And that is ideally when I would probably have time to like film. So I've come to a place where I've kind of decided how often I would like to post, which is like once every 2 weeks. And then I'm also stressing about Instagram because I have no idea what to do with my Instagram account. Because I've linked it below, but if you go there, it's completely empty because I just do not know what to post on there. I'm very confused. I don't know what to do. That's been a challenge trying to figure out how to like incorporate the two channels. I'm not on TikTok. TikTok scares me, not gonna lie. It really does scare me. For some reason, there's just this sense of like dread and trepidation that I feel with TikTok. I don't know what it is. I'm not even on TikTok, to be honest, because there's just something about that app that scares the hell out of me. But I think I should be. I think maybe tackling Instagram might be more of an achievable goal than TikTok. Because with Instagram, I know they're all like social media, but I don't have the same fears of Instagram that I do of TikTok. Does that make any sense? Does anybody feel the same way? So yeah, I know I've just rambled. I'm just trying to get to a point where I can successfully incorporate all these channels and then get to a point where I'm actually consistently posting. And managing my time wisely and trying to do everything that I have to do, and this, which is more so like a passion of mine. So I'm hoping that I can get to a place where I'm actually posting quite frequently on here and not disappearing for a month. But yeah, in this video, we're going to look at all the books I read in March that I'm really excited to talk about because I did see it as quite a successful reading month. I only had one DNF, which is pretty good because I read at least, I think I read about 8 books. So one DNF, 8 books, not bad at all. So yeah, thank you for joining me and let's get into it. So the first book I read in March was a book called Not That Complicated by Isabel Murray. So it was this romantic comedy about this guy called Ray and another guy called Adam. Ray is this guy in his 30s. He's recently broken up with his partner because he caught the partner cheating on him with another guy. And so he's kind of still reeling obviously with the betrayal of it, but it's not so much that he's hurt by it. I think he's mostly moved past the initial like hurt feelings, but obviously there's still a bit of bitterness there, which is like to be expected. And it's with this guy called Adam, and they live in a small town, so it's one of those towns where everybody knows each other. It's not, they don't live in a city where I guess you could probably date someone and maybe like never run into them again. In this particular town, they're constantly running into each other because it's so small, and they have a local supermarket, the local cafe, the local this, you know what I mean? So it's one of those places where like if you want to escape your ex, you probably will have to move away. And it's this guy called Adam. Adam and Ray have an age gap. So Adam is in his early 20s and Ray was in his early to mid 30s, I believe. I think there was about 11 years between them, which was a point of contention in the story. I actually really enjoyed it. It was actually really interesting because it had a bit of a mystery subplot in the sense that they found two dead bodies in Ray's house, and part of this story is Ray having to move to the hotel that Adam works at because obviously with the police they're investigating, the bodies. Bodies had been there for a while. They weren't like recent like murders or anything. But obviously they had to do the due diligence of checking through the house and all that kind of stuff. So he spent a significant amount of the book in the hotel that Adam works, and so it gives him a chance to like interact. This book was really funny. It's the kind of book where if you're the kind of person who laughs out loud while reading and you're disturbed by it, you should probably read it at home. It had many like funny moments, many cringe-worthy moments as well. I found myself having a bit of secondhand embarrassment because Ray is a very awkward character. He like, blurts things out a lot. He doesn't particularly think through his actions. He's prone to being dramatic. And I did have like some moments where I was like, Ray, get it together. But he was very funny. It was very charming. Adam, despite being younger, was actually, I found him quite mature. He had always had a crush on Ray. And Ray obviously like finds that hard to believe because Adam is described as being like really attractive and really tall, and he was previously a model. So Ray has a hard time understanding why Adam likes him. I did really enjoy it. I did have a few issues in the sense that it did feel like it was dragging on from the middle of the book towards the end, because it was one of those things where you're like, can you get together already? I know you're going to end up together. I found being in Ray's head, because also it's single POV. So I found being in Ray's head exhausting at times. And this is the reason why I like a dual POV book, because you find yourself swapping between the characters' heads and it's like a different perspective. So it doesn't get as exhausting. But the thing about Ray is that I found Ray overwhelming. And because I found him so overwhelming and chaotic, having the book entirely in his perspective made me tired a little bit. I felt like if we had had Adam's POV, it would have given a bit of reprieve. And obviously, like, Ray is like naturally a very like awkward, like chaotic person. But the thing is, he was actually going through a lot at the same time. So having that level of, how would I describe it? Like, being in his head for the entire duration of the book did get exhausting at times. I wish that we had had Adam's POV for a bit of reprieve, because Adam was definitely more centered, like less chaotic. More Adam, despite being younger, I found was more mature, and I feel like I really needed the balance of Adam's POV in this book. Because we're in Ray's head, you almost don't understand why Adam likes him as well. So because like Ray feels unworthy, even though he probably wasn't, I don't think anybody is unworthy of love really. But because he was like that in his head, it then didn't, I don't know how to explain it. It was a lot of telling and not showing. It would have been nice to see Ray through Adam's eyes, to know the things that he found charming, that he loved about Ray, all the little quirks, those moments of when characters are falling in love. I love this perspective of each character, to see how it's forming in their heads. But we didn't get that again because it's single POV. So I found myself a bit dissatisfied because of that, because I didn't understand. Because Adam was in love with Ray. Like, he had no qualms about their relationship. He wanted to be with Ray. And for me, I would have loved the added perspective of knowing what was going through Adam's head, what he loved about Ray. And it was a crush he had had for years, as also. The issue was the fact that I didn't know what was going through Adam's head, the fact that Ray was a bit chaotic at times, the fact that I just wanted Ray to like shut up and just be with this guy. It was enjoyable overall. I definitely suggest it. Is it the best book I've ever read? No. Will I reread it? I don't think so. But it was really nice. There were just a couple of issues for me. But the author comes across as very funny, because obviously their interactions were really funny. Like, you'll find, if you like a rom-com, you find yourself laughing a bit. Like, the humor there is amazing. I do understand why people like it. I think it's quite highly rated on Goodreads as well. I understand why people love it. I understand why people like it. Sometimes I just felt myself needing a bit of a break, which is impossible when a book is in single POV. You can't have a break from that person. And for me, having a book entirely in one person's perspective usually brings it down a bit, especially when it's a romance, because I like to see both characters, and I like to understand what it is that they find so intriguing and what they love so much about the other person, which is impossible to tell, especially when the person who the book's POV is in is not particularly confident and is questioning their self-worth, and you know what I mean. It's very difficult. So I wish we had had that, but ultimately I did have a good time with it. I think you could make a really good movie as well, like a rom-com. It would be nice to see a rom-coms feature more like queer couples. I don't see a lot of that, and I feel like this would be a really good movie, I think. So if they ever make this into a movie, come back to this video and tell me I was right. And then the next book I read was called Empty Net, and it's in the Scoring Chances series by Avon Gale. I hope I'm pronouncing that properly. You had Kindle Unlimited, and I was like, I'm on a mission to read every single male hockey romance out there, because I am loving this genre, to be honest with you. Like, it's so much fun. I particularly liked this series because it focused on the EHCL, if I'm not mistaken, which is the lower league of hockey. I'm not too familiar with hockey, and I'm learning a lot actually from reading these books, but it's like a lower, let me make sure I have that correct. Right? Yeah. So it's like the lower leagues, because all the other hockey romances that I've read, they've all been in the NHL, which I know is like the highest level. So like they're all really like wealthy and they earn a lot of money. So it's nice to get that added perspective of like the leagues that make up like professional hockey, and the challenges that come with being in certain leagues. So this one, they play professional hockey, but they don't make as much because they're not as good as the people in the NHL. I don't understand. It was nice to have this series in focus on that league, if that makes any sense. And with this book, I don't know why, again, I started with book four. I really should have started with book one, but I started with book four because it was the first book that I saw in the series. And this one is about a guy called Isaac and another guy called Laurent, who is called Saint. Now, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that properly. Laurent? I don't know. And Laurent gets transferred to Isaac's team. And Isaac is actually the captain of this team. So he has a bit of responsibility, getting the team together. And when you first meet Laurent, you're very irritated because he says something very homophobic. And obviously, that pissed me off straight away, as people saying homophobic things to other people should. And he comes across as like very angry, and Isaac was also quite hot tempered as well, so they obviously clashed and everything. And over the course of the book, they get to know each other. There was actually one scene, the scene in which Laurent has a run-in with Isaac's friends. By the way, they call Laurent Saint in this book, so I'm just going to keep on referring to him as Saint. If you hear me say Saint, it's Laurent, but I just don't want to be repeating Laurent in the event that I'm not pronouncing it properly. So there was a particular scene where Saint has an argument with Isaac's friends, and Isaac comes into, they're in the showers, and Isaac comes in to diffuse the situation. And it was such an emotional scene because Isaac gets to know why Saint is the way he is, and that's because he's been abused. Actually, Saint, his dad was a very wealthy, successful player who played in the NHL, but his dad was terribly abusive. Like, when I tell you, terribly abusive. It never ceases to amaze me about the evil that people are capable of, especially in reference to their own children. And Saint's dad was just such a terrible person. And then when he and Isaac have this moment in the showers, Isaac finds out why he's so hateful. And it all stems from the abuse that he's had to suffer throughout the course of his life by being his father's son. And the fact that his father is such a successful hockey player makes it's like an added layer of complication, because with success in that kind of situation comes power. And it's like, how do you handle being the son to this guy that a lot of people admire, but is actually a vile, disgusting human being? And I think kudos to Isaac, because Isaac really stepped up here, as a captain, as a person. He decided to take Saint under his wing, and he actually is the one that gives him the nickname Saint, which Laurent loves, by the way. He loves that name, and they become friendly. And Saint has never had a chance to like explore his sexuality before, so it was also a book of discovery. Isaac has a really interesting backstory of his own. I don't know if talking about his backstory would spoil the book, but it explains why he moves in with their coach, because Isaac actually lives with their coach, and his backstory is really sad, but he's turned out such a lovely guy. And so he takes Laurent into that little bubble that he's created with their coach, who is with their assistant. So the coach and the assistant coach are a couple as well, and Isaac lives with them. And in the story talks about why Isaac lives with them. There was something from his past that was haunting him. So as a way of protecting him, coach and his partner take him in to live with them. And they have such a beautiful relationship, friend. He has a beautiful relationship with his coach. He's a bit closer to his coach than his assistant coach, but he's close to both of them. And then he kind of takes Saint under his wing. They become very friendly. They become romantic. Obviously it's a romance book, so they fall in love. My favorite thing about this book was just exploring how abuse manifests in people, and how sometimes when somebody's a bully, oftentimes it's because their parents were their first bully. And this book really tackles abuse, I think, in a respectful way. It tackles how abuse manifests in people's lives on a daily basis, just like the domino effects of abuse, how it just spreads around like a disease, how you abuse somebody and then they go on to abuse people, and how like the cycle just goes on and on and on. And I like the fact that Saint wasn't magically healed because he found love. He still had his own struggles, There was a particular part of the book, which I won't spoil, where Isaac has to confront Saint because he's noticed a pattern of behavior that's really unhealthy, like certain habits that Saint has. And it was such a beautiful part of the book because Isaac loves Saint so much. And he was in a state where he's like, I have to say something because I have to help him. It's clear that he needs help, but he doesn't know how to tackle it without like triggering Saint. So he goes to a therapist to ask the best way to approach it with Saint. Um, yeah, this book was really special. I absolutely just adored it. Just to see people like step up to take care of each other and be there for one another. Like, this is what makes a romance book beautiful, is when they have when people just show up for each other. And this book they had like a lot of like things that they would come up with to make each other comfortable. Consent was so key in this book. It was so beautiful to see the mutual respect between them. They had coping mechanisms for each of their respective traumas. Saint's healing felt organic. It wasn't the case where like he suffered this horrible thing and then all of a sudden, because he's in a relationship, now he's healed. It wasn't that. It felt very gradual. It felt like he was, opening up to people eventually. And even at the end of the book, it wasn't as if he was completely healed. You could tell he was a different guy from the guy who walked into the team being very hostile and very abusive and very prone to push people away. He had actually started to open up. And I really, really liked the book. I don't know if I've done it justice. I would definitely check the trigger warnings because, especially on Goodreads, I don't know if you had it in the beginning of the book, but on Goodreads, I'm looking at it here and it does say that contains non graphic references to past childhood, physical and emotional abuse, as well as issues related to eating disorders, so bulimia and restricted eating, and like disordered thoughts about eating. So, definitely, if you have experienced any of these things, I definitely would heed the warning. I think it's a beautiful book. There's something about seeing people who have been through a hard time become happy, become better people, receive love, especially if they hadn't previously known what love was, know what it felt like to have a healthy dynamic with somebody. This is book 4, and I didn't start with book 1, as I said, but I absolutely just like adored this book. I don't know. I sometimes I find myself liking one character a bit more than the other, but in this book, I liked them both. It took me a while to warm up to Saint because, again, like that hostility and that like abuse that he leveled at Isaac and at the team by extension was very annoying at first, and I was very put off. But I did give him a chance, and he came through. I love the fact that there were so many funny moments between them. Like their relationship, as romantic as it was, as sexy as it was very funny as well. Like they had good banter between both of them and they waded through having like a playful dynamic, but also being very serious about what each other had been through and being open with each other and sharing, vulnerabilities. And knowing Isaac's backstory, I love the way that he showed up for Saint. He was definitely the stronger of the two characters in terms of mental health, but he had been through his own shit, and it was nice to see him just be such a sweet and understanding partner to Saint. You don't start off loving Saint, but I think he warms his way into his heart just the way he did with, Isaac and things. In this series, I think this might have been my favorite one, but I'm not sure. It's very hard for me to pick favorites, but I loved this one, and it made me obviously want to read the rest of the series because I just thought it was such a well written book and I really, really enjoyed it. So definitely check it out. Check the trigger warnings, please, I beg. But also, it's definitely worth reading. It was really good, I think. Next book I read was book 3. Just so you know, I read this series in a very backwards manner, and I apologize for the disorganization that will come from it. But the next book I read was called Power Play in the Same Scoring Chances series, and this was about their coach, Misha, and their assistant coach, Max. And this is how they started. So in this book, both Misha and Max used to play for the big leagues. And Max had to step away because he sustained a career ending injury, which was actually caused by Misha. Not on purpose. Hockey is a very dangerous sport and accidents happen. But the reason why Max wasn't playing anymore was because of an injury that Misha had caused. And so he obviously has stopped playing and he comes to the team to coach, to be the assistant coach. And then he meets Misha. And their relationship was complicated because of that, because Misha was still carrying a lot of guilt over the fact that Max wasn't playing anymore. But Max came into the team, into that dynamic. He didn't have any resentments. He understood that it was an accident, and sometimes accidents have lifelong consequences. So he doesn't come in with any resentments towards Misha at all. He's very happy. Max is very sunshine. He could be described as like your sunshine character. He's very happy go lucky. He's very bright. He's very warm. He's very funny. He's very easygoing. And then you have Misha, who is like very stoic, loving, kind, but like a bit reserved. And so they had a very interesting dynamic where Misha, in all his reservation, feels extremely guilty for essentially ending Max's career. And Max just really just wants a new start and is not really holding on to any of that anymore. He's moving on with his life. And it was nice to see them just be there for each other. In this book, you learn about Misha's background. And the fact that he connected so well with Isaac from the previous book made so much sense, because he has a very similar background to Isaac in this of like how they started. And so that has uniquely bonded them together. You learn how Misha got to America, how he got his money to sustain a living and everything. I love a book with a complicated character, and Misha was like that in the sense that he still had a lot of guilt for the life that he had lived and what he had done to sustain himself in the US, because again he also comes from a similarly abusive background. And he was such a remarkable character. I loved how do you even describe a character you love so much? He was there for the team. There's something very paternal about Misha. He's very like kind. He's willing to take people under his wing. He's such a paternal figure for the boys that he coaches as well. And it was just nice to see his dynamic with Max. I think with Max, the thing about Max is that he's so warm and he's so sunshiny. The way that I would describe it is Max takes a lot of emotional burdens off Misha. Their relationship felt easy in the sense that they easily connected and they had this beautiful chemistry. But at the same time, they had to deal with the fact that Isaac needed them. They basically took in Isaac because he was going through a hard time. And then what he was going through was similar to what Misha had gone through as well. So it was kind of bringing back memories for him, and he was struggling a little bit. I kind of just love a book where there's like mutual like comfort, and then there's this intimacy of being together. And I honestly, I don't know what to say about this book, but all I can say is that it's a beautiful book. It's spicy, with their relationship dynamic, but it's a beautiful book in terms of the fact that you feel like characters can open up, and then they get this like really beautiful love in which they're both mutually invested. What else can I say? I As an aside to this book, I really enjoyed seeing the beginnings of Misha and Isaac's relationship, because I had read Isaac's book first, which I shouldn't have. I knew that they were friendly, I knew that they were close, but it was nice to see how that relationship formed. Um, and my goodness, it was the way that Misha took Isaac under his wing and protected him and shielded him and gave him a soft place to land when he was in such a terrible place was so sweet to see. And I like romance in which the characters feel well rounded. And one of the ways in which I find you can do that as an author is to include really good backstories for your characters and let them have friends and family. And so the relationship that Misha had with Isaac was really beautiful. It was nice to see how it formed. It was nice to see Misha just unreservedly just like care for him and take him under his wing. It was nice to see how Max stepped up as well. Max also has a really beautiful family with his mom and dad and his brother and his brother's wife and his niece. He comes from a really lovely family. So when you meet Max's family, you understand why he is the way he is, because honestly, his family is the sweetest, as like the sweetest, kindest, most understanding people. And it was great to see a character like Misha, who wasn't, lucky enough to be born into a family like that. To see him embraced by Max's family was really sweet. I did find myself wanting a little bit more on page time with just Max and Misha. I felt like I could have done with a little bit more. When I finished the book, I was a bit disappointed in the sense I was like, oh, I really wanted more with them. So that's why it wasn't a perfect book, because it didn't feel satisfactory in the sense that I was wanting more, but it was a really beautiful book and I'm really glad that I found it. It was, yeah, it was just really, I love a sweet book, and I love a book that can balance like the chemistry and the dynamic and the emotional. And I like an emotional book, and emotional, I think he had all the makings of a perfect romance, and I'm just so glad that I found it. And yeah, Misha is a really good character, as is Max. I feel like sometimes the Sonia character gets a bit of a short stick because you find that they're not as complicated, but they're like integral to the story because they give the more stoic, the more reserved character a soft place to land, and that's kind of what Max did for Misha, and I just absolutely loved it. So these two books, phenomenal, loved, loved, loved. Sorry, and then the next book I read in this series was called Coach's Challenge, and this is actually the last book in the series. This was between Troy and Shane. And I liked this book because it featured dynamics I haven't been used to in romance books in general. So these featured two older men. So they had both played professional hockey, and now one was coaching and the other one was about to retire. And I really enjoyed the dynamic of having, because you read about these books, but it's usually people in their 20s. But with this book, you got to see two older men. There was a little bit of an age gap, but because obviously Shane is in his 30s and Troy was in his 40s or 50s. I also loved the dynamic of two grumps in love. I feel like sometimes you have like a sunny character and a grumpy character, but they were kind of two grumpy people. And they had arguments and they had a bit of a rocky start because they were butting heads, which creates a very interesting dynamic because you obviously know that arguing for them is like foreplay. So it's interesting to see that kind of dynamic where they're both like emotionally constipated, older man kind of trope. But it was very sweet. I really enjoyed it. It was probably not my favorite in the series. I put it in the, I don't know where I'd rank it in terms of the whole series, but I thought it was very enjoyable, albeit a bit forgettable in a sense. I don't know. I don't want to call it forgettable because it's not as if it wasn't a good book. It was a good book and I enjoyed it, but in comparison to the other two, it just didn't make as big of an impact on me. If you read the series, do you feel the same way? Like, was this one a bit different? It was just two men falling in love, and I loved it. I feel like there wasn't too much conflict. It was like a nice sort of ending to the series. And also, I found that the reason why I don't rank this one very highly is that I felt like I barely knew Troy and Shane. It was a little less on the emotional side, and I feel like there wasn't enough done to establish them as characters. Like, I knew they liked each other, I knew their backstories. Like, I just felt like I didn't know them. There wasn't enough of a development where I felt like, oh, these people are like destined to be together. You know what I mean? It felt a bit lackluster on that end, on like the development, and I felt it ended with me not particularly knowing either of them. It was very heavy on like the sexual aspect, which is lovely, but I just wish we had a little bit more on the emotional side because I feel like that would have made it a bit more memorable for me. Because most of the time, the books that I tend to gravitate towards are things that have a good balance of the sexy times and the fun, but also solid emotional grounding. And I felt like this one kind of lacks that. I like Shane's best friend. I liked I liked their respective best friends. I liked the addition of the team. Also, I did say, you know how we talked about Saint in book 4? So this team was actually the team that Saint's father used to coach. And obviously we know that he was a very abusive guy. I think for me the most interesting thing about this book was the team and how they had to get used to not having an abusive coach. And having like a coach that encouraged them. Troy is tough. He's tough, but he's fair. So for me, the most interesting thing about this book was definitely the team dynamics and having a coach that actually like loved the team and wanted them to succeed and didn't like abuse them or like make them fear, and them having to transition from being a toxic team or a team that was so entrenched in toxicity that when they finally had a coach that was healthier, it was a bit of a shock to them. Oh, and also a standout character for me in this book was actually Xavier. I would love to read a book about Xavier because he seems really sweet. And what can I say? I love a sweet man. So I would love to read a book about Xavier. He mostly intrigued me. So I think mostly the reason why this book wasn't my favorite was that I found myself more interested in the team. And also because I felt like they weren't fleshed out enough. So at the end of it, I liked that they were together, but how do I explain it? I didn't feel emotionally fulfilled by the end of it, and I felt like there should have been more done to establish them as characters. but it was overall like still enjoyable. But it just it fell a bit flat, especially in comparison to book 4 and 5, which sorry, what? It just fell a bit flat, especially in comparison to books 3 and 4, which I just loved. As you might have been able to see, I love them so much I wasn't even able to put into words just how much. This one kind of fell flat for me in terms of like development, and I don't have any strong feelings towards Troy or Shane, which I don't think is ideal about a romance. But ultimately, I did enjoy the story. I loved it, like team that they built. But for me, it was more so about the team rather than the two of them, if that makes any sense. But I'm happy that they're together. Obviously, because I had been having such a good time, I was like, I'll read the rest of the series. And so I went to book 1 and read Breakaway, which I was shocked because Breakaway was the one book that I DNF'd this month. And he had a lot of promise. I knew that the author could write because I had read 3 books by them, but I was shocked by how much I didn't like Breakaway. And it featured 2 guys. So it was Lane and Jared. So they play for the lower leagues, same league as these other guys that we've been talking about. And this book, I could not get on with it. And the funny thing is, I liked Lane. I didn't feel particularly strongly about Jared because, for whatever reason, I liked Lane's personality. I liked his relationship with his best friend. He started off with this team that really hated him because he's very socially awkward and he doesn't really understand social cues or like conversation. And I thought he was an interesting character, but it did get to a point where I got exhausted. It's kind of like not that complicated that I talked about earlier, where there is such a thing as quirky to the point where it loses it veers off the track. And this is what I felt about this book. It was very hard being in Lane's head because he was very I just wish that there was a point where the story felt disjointed in a way, and I found that eventually I would just keep putting the book down all the time. And then it got to a point where I was just like, oh, why am I continuing to read this book? I'm not connecting to it. I did like it at the start. I did think it was promising, but it just got to the point where I was like, I'm not getting the story. I didn't hate Jared, but I didn't like him either. I didn't connect to him. He felt like a background of the story, which is weird because he was supposed to be the main character. But this book was a lot, and not in a good way. It just felt, it felt repetitive. It felt all over the place. It felt like we were going nowhere in terms of advancement. I just really got exhausted, and I was very disappointed because I had liked the 3 previous books, and I'd especially loved Isaac and Saint's books and Misha and Max's books. So I was expecting to, at the very least, like it. But I got to a point where, even though I did like Lane, he got a bit too much for me, and the story went away, and as did my zeal to continue to read it. So, which is really sad, but it is what it is. It was promising, but I just felt like a lot could have been done to really like edit it and like make it a lot less choppy, a lot less chaotic, and actually have a story come out of it, if that makes any sense. If you feel the same reading this book, is this also your favorite? It was just not gelling. Another thing I didn't like was the way that Zoe was being talked about. Kind of rubbed me the wrong way, the way Zoe would be talked about. She was a bit objectified in this book in a way that I cannot get behind. And it was weird because it was by Lane and he's gay and has no attraction to it. This book felt as if like the author wrote it on a drunk night out and nobody edited it and she just published it. That's how it felt to me. I just felt like it could have been better executed in so many ways. I didn't finish the book. Finishing it would have meant skimming, and I just wasn't going to skim. So I was just like, I guess, it's just going to be it. And it's very disappointing to not finish a book, but ultimately I was just like, I'm going to push myself into a slump if I keep on reading it. So I gave up, guys. I gave up. Save of, and then I went on to read Save of the Game, which is the second book in the series, and it's about Riley and Ethan. If you had read book 1, then you know exactly who Riley is because he and Lane are friends. And I was actually quite curious about him when I read about him in the book because he was quite synonymous with drinking coconut water. It was a sign of how bad that book was. If the one memorable person from it was a person who was barely there, who was drinking coconut water. So I was very intrigued by what Riley's book would look like, and intrigued by his personality because I did like him from the little I saw of him. And I liked this book a lot. I would actually rank it higher than book 5 because there was something particularly. I loved this book. I'm not gonna lie. I think I've said that before, but I loved the dynamic between Ethan and Riley. So Riley comes from a very wealthy family, so they want for nothing in terms of finances. and his parents are really successful, but the problem is they're very emotionally distant, and he comes from a family in which he was basically invisible for all of his childhood. He's the goalie of the team, and he's very hardworking, and he's very like type A. He's very organized, he's very clean, he does his exercises, he's always trying to look for a way to better himself in hockey because he's good at it, and he has found a place for himself in which he excels. And then Ethan comes from he comes from a different dynamic, because even though his father is not in the picture, he has a great relationship with his mother and his sisters. But the thing is that Riley knows that he has more money than he will ever be able to use. He's aware of how like wealthy his family is. He's aware of how much disposable income is available to him and the fact that he doesn't actually need it. So I think he's always kind of looking for ways to help his friends who are not so privileged. And obviously allowing somebody help you in that kind of way can be a little bit of a bruise to the ego, but honestly, Riley just wants to help. And it kind of, he understands why his friends are not willing to like take money from him and things, but he just wished they would, because in his head he's like, but if I can help, why won't you let me help? You know what I mean? So he's kind of struggles with that. And Ethan comes from a background where he has this incredible family, and they're so close. He's close with his mother and his sisters, but they are struggling financially. And then he meets Riley and they become roommates. And Riley initially tries to hide the fact that he comes from a wealthy family because of the notions that are attached to, you know, being the rich kid. And because he kind of wants to help Ethan in the way that he usually would help any of his friends. And Ethan is, it kind of wounds Ethan's pride. Like, he's a really lovely guy, but he finds it hard to accept help. And help is what Riley offers him. So when he finds out that Riley hasn't been taking his checks for rent, he becomes very upset naturally, because it's kind of like it's deceitful not to take someone's rent. But then Riley kind of explains to him why he's doing what he's doing. And then they eventually get to a point where, you know, Ethan is able to accept more help. And also, I think what I loved most about this book is the exploration of people put a lot of importance on monetary help, like how you help someone with money. But what is often not talked about is emotional help, because while Ethan at times felt bad and resistant to Riley helping him financially, what he didn't realize was that he had brought so much joy to Riley's otherwise empty life and empty world. Like, Riley had nothing to look forward to besides hockey. He didn't have a close family, he didn't have that many friends except Lane. And what was apparent throughout the whole book is that even though Ethan didn't bring money, he brought happiness. And sometimes I feel like we as a society, we don't view happiness as quite the same as money. And if you think about it, it's like not that they were deliberately trying to do a trade-off. But I think from Ethan's perspective, he felt like Riley was constantly helping him, but he didn't realize how much he was helping Riley, if that makes any sense. How much love and color and life that he had brought to Riley just by existing, just by being his friend, just by being his boyfriend. And the fact that he now had a family with Ethan's family. And sometimes I feel like that's not talked about enough. It's like we get so caught up in like money, but do we ever think about the other side of a relationship, the companionship, the happiness, the little moments of intimacy, of being completely known to somebody? And I think that was my favorite part of this book. It wasn't it wasn't as much of a talking point as the financial, but it was really interesting in terms of how it was clear as day that Ethan was helping Riley in a very similar way. It was just from a different, you know, avenue. I really, really love their relationship. I love when the intimate parts, like the sexual dynamic, ties into, I don't know how to explain it, like almost like they had a very like different sexual dynamic that I'm used to reading, and I really like that as well. They felt the way that they grew to like each other, and their exploration into like going from friends to like romantic partners was really sweet. I loved their relationship dynamic, how that all flowed. I love the fact that, I think one thing about Avon Gale is that her characters, their sexual preferences are very distinct. She explores sex within a story in a very interesting way that I really like. Her characters are very different. Like, you can recognize them based on what they like, and it's very tied to like their life experiences. it's very ingrained in their personalities rather than feeling generic, which I think sometimes romance books are guilty of, where it's like a sexual dynamic that is kind of this, especially in a series where despite having different characters, they all seem to fall within a very cliche kind of sexual dynamic. And I like that each couple in her series has a very distinct way that they interact sexually and romantically that feels distinctly theirs. And Riley and Ethan had that as well, which pertained well to the story overall. But yeah, I really love this one. If I was gonna rank the series, and I would say first Isaac and Saint's book, because if there was a perfect book in the series, I think it would be that. Followed very closely by Misha and Max's book, because I those two books I will go back and read again. I just know that they're going to be rereads that I do every year because they impacted me emotionally, and I felt like the couples were solid. So for me, those two books, it would then yeah, it's hard for me to explain. Like you can see, I'm getting overwhelmed because it's almost like when you describe somebody you really love and you want to do it justice, but you can't because you still feel so emotionally overtaken by the love that you have for them. And it's kind of like that with these books. I'm kind of emotionally overwhelmed by how much I really liked them and how much they impacted me. So it's a bit difficult to talk about them. And I'm still getting used to talking about books that I like online and out loud. You know what I mean? So those two books I really loved. And it would be Isaac and Saint's book, Misha and Max's. I think third place would probably be Riley and Ethan. I loved Riley and Ethan's book. Those three books in the series I would read again and again and again. I just loved them so much, and I love the dynamics. I would say probably right after would be Troy and Shane's book. Nice, but ultimately I thought it was quite forgettable in a sense. And then I obviously didn't really like Lena and Jared's book, so that comes last. But overall, like, I'd give them a rating of 3.5 on a bad day and 4 on a good day, which is good. I've been getting into a lot of like queer hockey romance, and I'm enjoying it because it feels so different to all the romance books I've read before. And it's just nice to discover something new, to discover new dynamics between people. Like, I feel like to me, reading, especially romance, feels like exploration of the state of humans. And when you have characters with all these dynamics where you might not have come across people in real life who have these, it's really interesting to read about them and how they're finding love. And yeah, I really enjoyed it. If you have read these series, let me know what you thought. Last book I read was Time to Shine. And I don't know if I've mentioned it before, but I've read Rachel Reid's Game Changer series, and we all know I love Ilya and Shane. So when I saw that she had written another book and it was also available on Kindle Unlimited, I was like, I have to read it surely. And it's about Landon and Casey. So Casey plays for the big leagues, but Landon plays for like a smaller league, and so he gets called up when one of the goalies of the big league team that they play for gets injured, like a temporary replacement. And I really connected with Landon in the sense that he's dealing with grief that he hasn't particularly worked through, despite the fact that many years have gone by since it happened. And he's also dealing with insecurities. Like, he has lovely parents, but the grief that I talked about, I don't want to spoil it, but the grief I talked about affected their entire family. And so they're in a suspended state of being stuck because they haven't had a chance to talk about how the death impacted their family. So he's in a state where he doesn't really connect to many people. He's grieving. He feels guilty about pursuing his hockey career and the fact that he gets to live, but this person that he loves so much didn't get to live and didn't get to achieve their dreams. And he's also dealing with a lot of insecurity around his capabilities. He is dealing with a lot of feelings of being undeserving of everything he's achieved, despite the fact that he's very skilled and he works very hard. And so he gets called up and he's very reserved, he's very to himself, and he meets Casey. And Casey was just a ball of sunshine from the start. Like, Casey is somebody who thrives off interactions with people. He doesn't like to be by himself a lot. He's very extroverted. He gets energy from being with people and talking to people and being social. He doesn't like to be by himself a lot. So imagine when he meets Landon, who's like the complete opposite, likes to be by himself, keeps to himself, very quiet, and he kind of draws Landon out of his shell just by the fact that he's just so, he likes everybody to be included. He's like the social glue of the group. So like, let's go out, let's do this, let's do that. You know what I mean? So he's very, very bright, very cheery, very sunny. He comes from a wealthy family. His father was a successful hockey player. And obviously he's in the big league, so he earns quite a lot of money. And then he has this big house and like nobody lives there. So he invites Landon to live with him, and Landon's like, I want to pay you rent. And he's like, trust me taking rent from you would be silly because I have all this money and I have this big house and I'm not using it. So Landon finally accepts and comes to live with him, and then they bond and then they form an emotional connection. And also, another part of this book that it wasn't explicitly stated, but Landon seems to be on the asexual spectrum. which was really interesting. And he was in a state where he didn't really, he knew who he was attracted to, but he is still coming to terms with his sexuality. Everybody has a different timeline as to how they discover who they are and who they like and who they're attracted to and all those kind of things. And he was still in a state where he didn't really think too much about the sexual side of his nature. And I love the fact that there was a lot of space for him to do so. Like Casey, even though Casey was the more like experienced character and outgoing and had a bit of a reputation, Casey was just so patient with him, and there was never any pressure, and there was so much like consent. I just love a book that does consent well, especially for a character who might be struggling or a character who is not as sexually outgoing as the other one. I like the fact that there's space for them both to be heard. They're equally as deserving of like love and attention, and I love that that really came across in the book. I love the fact that there was no pressure on Landon, and that Casey was super respectful. And also Casey has a lovely family as well, and then their families eventually meet. Landon eventually talks to his family about his struggles and the fact that they never talked about the death in the family. And it ended up being a really beautiful book. I really enjoyed it. It's what I've come to expect from Rachel Reid. I haven't liked all of the reads I've read by her, but I've liked majority of the things that I've read from her, and it just makes me excited to go through her backlog and go back again to see if she's written anything that I haven't read. um yeah. Casey and Landon are one of those couples that I will probably find myself thinking about, because I just loved them both. I loved them together. I loved their dynamic. I love the fact that they felt like a couple that would go the distance, because there's so much respect between, there's so much love between them. There's so much willingness to be there for each other, to show up for each other. And yeah, it was it was beautiful. They incorporated a lot of each other's lives. I feel like a lot of people might read this and think that maybe Casey was a bit too, maybe like did more. But I also feel like if you think about it, Landon was going through a lot more struggles. You know what I mean? Like Casey didn't really, except for like his wanting to be alone or being like afraid of like the dark and things like that. Because that was a trope in this book. Like he's very afraid of the dark. Apart from that, like he didn't really have that many problems in his life. And you obviously, when you're filled, you can pour into people. And I feel like that's what Casey was in a position to pour into Landon, who wasn't particularly going through the best season of his life. So I felt like it made sense for Casey to be like the more forthcoming one, the more encouraging one, that kind of thing. One thing I did like is the team making fun of Casey and calling him stupid. I didn't really like that. It was like a bit of a joking point, and I found myself not loving that. I felt like I was just like, guys, at some point we have to stop, and I kind of felt annoyed by it. It was like a running joke, and it's one of those things I'm just like, please, can you stop? He's not stupid. Like, obviously, he may not be the sharpest tool in the box, but like the whole like his stupid thing was very annoying and got very old very quickly. And it's one of those books where I think I'm gonna go back and read it again, because it was just so sweet, and I loved the development of it. It was a bit of a slow burn, but again, it's one of the things where you would kind of expect it to be a slow burn, because given the circumstances of one or both of the characters. So I really, really loved it, and I would love to go back to Rachel Reid's backlog and see if she has written anything I haven't read, because I really enjoy her writing. I highly recommend Time to Shine. I don't know why it took me so long to read it, but I have, and I'm happy that I did. So yeah. So we are at the end. If you stayed this long, thank you so much for watching this video. Thank you so much for your support thus far. I would like to know, have you read these books before? Like, what did you think? Like, do you have any more recommendations of books in a similar vein that you think I would enjoy? Please leave them down below. Remember to please like, comment, and subscribe, as it helps my channel, reach a wider audience. And I will see you when I see you, hopefully as soon as I can. Thank you so much. Bye.